Welcome to our deep dive into the word Karen. You've probably heard this term, even maybe used it yourself. But have you ever stopped and thought about where it came from and all the social dynamics it represents?
It really is fascinating how Karen has gone beyond just being a meme and become this cultural symbol. It kind of captures certain anxieties in society, especially anxieties about race and privilege. And it shows how those anxieties can, manifest in some pretty uncomfortable ways.
Yeah, it's true. On the surface, it's easy to just laugh at the picture of a middle-aged white lady, demanding to speak to the manager. But when you look deeper, you find these connections to race and privilege, even to historical figures like Carolyn Bryant.
Oh, yeah, Carolyn Bryant. Her accusations against Emmett Till, well, they led to his lynching back in 1955.
Right.
And, her case, even though it happened decades ago, gives us important historical context to understand this whole Karen thing. It's like an example of how some white women have used their perceived victimhood against people of color, and yet often with really awful results.
It's a scary reminder that this Karen meme, even when it's meant to be funny, is rooted in a long and disturbing history. To really understand how it evolved, we've got insights from a bunch of sources like Wikipedia and articles from Time, The Guardian, The Atlantic, even the New York Times.
And what all these sources show is that Karen didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's actually the most recent version of a bunch of terms that have been used in African-American culture to describe problematic white women.
Interesting.
We can trace it way back to Miss Anne from the antebellum South.
Oh, wow.
Then to Becky in the 1990s. And now we have the Karen we all know today.
So it seems like Karen represents the evolution of this very specific type of person. But what defines this type? What are the things that connect Miss Anne, Becky, and Karen?
Well, our sources point out a few key traits: a sense of entitlement, a tendency to complain, and a really self-centered way of interacting with the world. It's like a my way or the highway kind of attitude.
And that my way often means consciously or not using their privilege to get what they want.
Exactly. It's about understanding the power dynamics involved. The Karen meme, whether we mean it to or not, points to this pattern of white women using their perceived victimhood against others, especially people of color who are seen as less powerful.
This is where the whole racial context becomes really important. It's not just about being demanding. It's about using that demanding behavior against someone who is seen as less powerful and often with racial undertones.
Like the Amy Cooper incident in Central Park. Remember she called the police on a black bird watcher?
Yeah, I remember that.
That's a perfect example of this dynamic. It's a modern-day example of something that's been happening for centuries. And the term Karen captures it.
It seems like 2020 was a turning point for this Karen meme, with the Black Lives Matter movement growing and events like George Floyd's murder causing outrage across the country.
Oh, absolutely. It became a way to call out a certain kind of racism.
Yeah.
And to show the power imbalances in these situations. But the meme does have its critics. Some people say that labeling it as racist actually takes away from the real discrimination minorities face. They argue that white people can't be victims of racism.
That's a valid point. It's like focusing on the term's potential racism distracts from the systemic racism that people of color actually experience.
Right. And then on the other hand, some people will say the term itself is racist and sexist because it's specifically targeting white women. So it raises the question of whether it's fair to generalize about a whole group of people based on a stereotype.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Is it a slur? Is it social commentary? Can it be both? We're kind of wrestling with these questions as we try to understand the term and what it all means. So we've talked about how Karen is usually associated with women, but can men act like Karens too?
Well, The Atlantic actually tackled this exact question. And they say yes, absolutely. They say that the main problem here, entitlement and disregard for others, goes beyond gender. It's all about attitude, a way of being in the world that ignores the needs and feelings of others.
So it's not about being male or female, it's about the attitude.
That's interesting.
Think about it, demanding special treatment, breaking the rules, getting aggressive when things don't go your way. These behaviors aren't limited to any one gender. In fact, the article used Donald Trump and Elon Musk as examples of what they called male Karens.
Oh, wow.
Musk even got the nickname Space Karen.
Space Karen.
Yeah.
I love it. But seriously, the fact that there's no widely accepted male equivalent is pretty interesting. Why is it so easy to label this behavior in women with one name, but so hard to do the same for men?
It's a really good question. It raises some important points about how we see things as a society. And maybe it suggests that we're more ready to understand entitled white women than men who act the same way.
Yeah, maybe Ken or Kevin will catch on. Who knows? But for now, let's dig into the criticisms of the term Karen itself, because this is where things get really interesting.
Definitely. Some big names have weighed in on this debate. They say Karen is sexist, ageist, classist, even misogynistic. And they bring up good points about how it can be harmful and silencing. Hadley Freeman, for example, says it's less about describing behavior and more about controlling it. It's like a warning, a way of saying, behave or you'll be labeled a Karen. That kind of pressure can be really silencing, even if it's not intentional.
Yeah, the fear of being labeled and made fun of is real.
Yeah.
And it can definitely make women less willing to speak their minds.
Jennifer Weiner, the author, she talked about this in the New York Times. She said, the Karen meme has made her hesitant to speak up, even when she has a legitimate complaint. She's worried about being unfairly labeled and dismissed.
It's a powerful statement about how much this term can affect people, even when it's meant as a joke. It shows how it can be used to shut women up and invalidate their concerns.
And some argue that's exactly the point, that the term is being used on purpose to silence women and ignore their opinions no matter how valid they are.
Right, it's like saying, your opinion doesn't matter because you're just a Karen. That kind of dismissive attitude can be really harmful, especially when it stops women from bringing up legitimate problems.
Which brings us to the real-world consequences. Our sources point to cases of women named Karen being bullied, harassed, even discriminated against just because of their name.
Wow.
It reminds us that words have power, even when they're used in a joking way.
That's true.
And some people argue that Karen is a more socially acceptable way to be misogynistic. It's like replacing openly sexist language with a term that seems harmless.
So instead of calling a woman a derogatory name, you call her a Karen.
Right. It lets people express sexist views without facing the same level of backlash.
Exactly. It's a more subtle kind of sexism that can be harder to call out, but it can be just as damaging.
And this leaves us with a tough question. Is Karen a legitimate term for describing a certain kind of behavior, or is it a dangerous weapon used to silence and marginalize women? It's a question we're going to keep exploring as we go deeper into this fascinating and complex topic. But before we go on, let's take a look at some real-world examples of Karen behavior in action. Okay, so we've been peeling back the layers of this Karen meme, its origins, the racial dynamics it brings up, and all the criticism around it. But to really get it, I think we need to see it play out in real life. And the Soho Karen incident is a perfect example. Well, maybe not perfect. It's pretty disturbing, actually.
Oh, yeah. Me up in Seto.
Yeah.
Her case really shows how Karen behavior can escalate. It can start as a simple misunderstanding and then turn into something much more serious.
Right. For those who don't know, she's the woman who attacked a 14-year-old black teenager in a hotel lobby.
Yeah.
She falsely accused him of stealing her phone.
It's a really upsetting incident. And it highlights the danger of throwing around accusations like that, especially when they're directed at a person of color. It went from an argument about a phone to assault charges.
It went from 0 to 100 real quick. And sadly, this isn't the only example. Our sources talk about this surge in this kind of behavior during the COVID pandemic, especially around things like mask mandates and all the anti-Asian sentiment that was going around.
It seems like the pandemic, with all its anxiety and tension, created the perfect environment for Karen behavior. You know, those feelings of entitlement and disregard for others that we talked about.
Right.
Well, they were amplified. And that led to these more frequent and intense displays of entitlement.
People were stressed out, and it felt like every other day there was a new video of a Karen going viral.
You're right. It was like the pandemic was a trigger. It made those pre-existing feelings of entitlement and disregard for others so much worse.
And it wasn't just individuals acting out either. The Karen meme even led to some legislative action.
Oh, yeah, that's right. In 2020, San Francisco passed the Karen Act. It made it illegal to make racially biased 911 calls. This law was directly addressing a behavior that we often associate with Karen. It shows how a meme can go from the internet to the real world and even inspire real change.
It's pretty amazing how a meme that seems so simple can have real-world consequences. It even helped create some meaningful social change. Makes you wonder if Karen is just an American thing, or if this type of person exists all over the world.
That's a great question. And from what we found, it looks like this isn't just an American thing.
Really?
The Philippines has Mertrots, Poland has Madka and Karina. It seems like almost every culture has their own word for this kind of entitled person.
So it's like these behaviors, entitlement, demandingness, not caring about others, they're just human traits, not something specific to any one culture or group.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It suggests that Karen isn't just an American thing. It's a reflection of something deeper in human nature. It makes you think, what is it about us humans that lets this sense of entitlement grow?
Is it how we're raised, our social systems, or is it something more basic, something we're born with?
Those are some really interesting questions that make you think about how complex human behavior is and how society influences us. I think for our purposes here, it's important to remember that this Karen meme, even though it started as a joke, is tapping into something very real and very deeply ingrained in how humans interact.
It's like a mirror showing us these uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in. By looking at the history and how this archetype shows up around the world, we can have more meaningful conversations about race, gender, and privilege in society.
Definitely. While the term Karen might eventually disappear, the real issues it brings up entitlement, prejudice, and the abuse of power will probably stick around. It's through talking openly and understanding these complicated dynamics that we can start to dismantle the systems that let these behaviors thrive.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Karen, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember isn't the term itself, but the issues it brings to light.
Yeah.
Karen is more than just a meme. It reflects anxieties we have as a society and ingrained power dynamics. By understanding the history, the criticisms, and the parallels around the world, we can move beyond the humor and have more nuanced conversations about race, gender, and privilege.
It's a call for all of us to be aware of our own biases, check our privilege, and use our voices to advocate for a more just and fair world.
Yeah, it really is. And, as we come to the end of our deep dive into Karen, I'm wondering, where do we go from here? What can we as individuals actually do to tackle these issues and make society more inclusive and fair?
That's a big question, isn't it? The Karen meme, as funny as it can be, has shown us some uncomfortable things about our society.
Yeah.
It's like a call to action for all of us to look at our own behaviors and biases. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first thing is awareness. We need to recognize our own biases and challenge our assumptions and be willing to listen to people who have different experiences than us.
So it's about actively seeking out different perspectives and having those tough conversations about race, gender, and privilege.
Exactly. It's about admitting that we all have blind spots and we can learn and grow from being open to new ideas. We also need to be careful about the language we use and how it might affect other people.
It's a reminder that words have power even when we use them casually or in a joking way. They can reinforce stereotypes and hurt people even if we don't mean to.
Absolutely. And like we've been talking about the term Karen, while sometimes it's used for social commentary, it can also be used to silence and dismiss people. We have to be aware of that and try to have more constructive and inclusive conversations.
So besides awareness and being mindful of our language, what else can we do to actually make a difference?
It's about actually doing something when we see injustice happening, whether it's speaking out against discrimination, supporting policies that promote equality, or helping organizations that are fighting for social justice.
It's about using our voices and our actions to create a world where terms like Karen are a thing of the past, like reminders of a time when these behaviors were okay, not something we challenged.
Yeah, it's about working towards a society where everyone is treated with respect, empathy, and understanding. A world where people are treated with dignity no matter their race, gender, or background.
That's a powerful vision, and one that I think we should all be working towards. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Karen, let's remember that this conversation isn't over.
Yeah, the Karen meme might go away, but the problems it highlights will still be there. It's up to all of us to keep talking about these issues, to challenge the status quo, and to build a more just and fair world.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive helped you understand the Karen phenomenon better. And more importantly, we hope it inspired you to keep learning about these important topics.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep working for a better future. Until next time, keep diving deep.